What makes a war film truly timeless? Is it the grit, the chaos, or the humanity hidden beneath it all? The 1970s gave us an entire decade of filmmakers who weren't afraid to stare into the fog of history and find poetry in the madness. From brutal realism to surreal satire, these films didn't just depict conflict, they redefined how we see it. Some were hits, others misunderstood, but decades later every one of them aged into pure cinematic gold. Patton, 1970. It begins with one man standing before an enormous American flag, his voice thundering across a theater. George C. Scott's portrayal of General George S. Patton isn't just acting, it's an explosion of ego, genius, and contradiction. Directed by Franklin J. Schaffner, this biopic wasn't your typical military epic. It was part battlefield chronicle, part psychological study, peeling back the layers of a man both brilliant and impossible to control. The opening monologue alone became legend, echoing through pop culture and quoted endlessly by film fans and generals alike. Scott himself refused the Academy Award for Best Actor, one of the boldest moves in film history, saying competitions between actors were ridiculous. Still, the movie swept 7 Oscars, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Original Screenplay. Behind the scenes, everything was about authenticity. The tanks, the locations, the dialogue, it all came from real-life accounts, even down to Patton's trademark pearl-handled revolvers and unpredictable temper. Historians still praise how accurately the film captures not just war, but obsession. Even Steven Spielberg once said Patton inspired him when making his own World War stories. It's not just about a man in uniform, it's about what ambition does to a soul. That's why half a century later, Patton still feels bigger than any explosion. It's the kind of film that doesn't just show power, it questions it. Mass, H.H., 1970. Before it became a beloved TV show, MASH was a sharp, unruly film that sliced through war movies like a scalpel through red tape. Directed by Robert Altman, it dropped audiences into a chaotic army medical camp during the Korean conflict, but everyone knew what it was really talking about: Vietnam. Altman wasn't interested in heroics or clean uniforms. He wanted the mess, the madness, and the absurd humor that came with trying to survive it all. Donald Sutherland and Elliot Gould play doctors who rebel against authority, not with bullets, but with sarcasm and pranks. The camp becomes a madhouse where laughter is the only armor against insanity. The film's overlapping dialogue and handheld style were revolutionary at the time. Critics called it undisciplined. Altman called it life. He wanted it to feel like you were eavesdropping on reality. And it worked. The audience felt trapped in the noise, confusion, and absurdity of a system run by fools. MASH won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and went on to become one of the highest-grossing movies of 1970. But more importantly, it made anti-war films entertaining without preaching. It said, if you can't cry about it, you might as well laugh. 50 years later, that line still cuts deep. Altman proved that comedy could be as powerful as tragedy, and in war, sometimes it's the only thing that keeps you human. Tora, 1970. Few films ever balance two sides of history so perfectly. Tora wasn't made just to entertain, it was built to educate and stun at the same time. The project united American and Japanese filmmakers, each directing their own side of the story, to recreate the attack on Pearl Harbor with almost documentary precision. Richard Fleischer, Toshio Masuda, and Kinji Fukasaku worked together to craft a dual-perspective epic that never pointed fingers, it just showed how miscalculations and pride collided to create disaster. Every aircraft uniform and line of dialogue was checked by historians and veterans. Even the Japanese Zero planes were rebuilt from scratch because real ones no longer existed. The result is less about action and more about inevitability. You watch the events unfold knowing where it's heading, yet unable to look away. There's no villain cackling, no Hollywood gloss, just duty, confusion, and a chilling sense that war can start not from hate, but from misunderstanding. When it was first released, audiences found it too cold and technical. But today, that restraint feels like brilliance. In an age of digital spectacle, Tora Tora stands tall as one of the last truly handcrafted war epics. It's the kind of movie that rewards patience and reminds you that even the most famous day in American history was for those living at complete chaos. Catch-22, 1970. Catch-22 is the film that dared to make madness logical. Based on Joseph Heller's best-selling novel, Mike Nichols turned an unfilmable book into a surreal looping nightmare that feels like a fever dream caught between comedy and despair. Set in World War II but made during the Vietnam era, the movie follows Bombardier Yossarian, played by Alan Arkin, who's desperate to stop flying missions. The catch? If he asks to be relieved for insanity, that proves he's sane enough to keep flying. Its absurdity is policy, a perfect metaphor for bureaucratic insanity. Nichols shot the film in Mexico using real vintage aircraft and staged some of the most jaw-dropping flight sequences of the decade. But what really makes Catch-22 special is its rhythm. Time folds in on itself, characters appear and vanish, and humor bleeds into tragedy without warning. The editing mimics the feeling of being trapped inside a nightmare that looks like paperwork. Critics were divided when it premiered. Some called it too confusing, others saw genius. But as the years rolled on, people realized Catch-22 wasn't meant to make you comfortable, it was meant to make you dizzy. It captured the absurd rhythm of systems that send men into chaos and call it procedure. Today it stands as one of the smartest war satires ever filmed, proof that sometimes the best way to expose madness is to laugh until it stops being funny. The Bridge at Remagen, 1970. In a decade that loved big battles and bigger personalities, The Bridge at Remagen took a different route. It zoomed in on exhaustion, doubt, and desperation at the war's very end. Directed by John Guillermin, the film is based on the true story of American troops racing to capture a critical bridge over the Rhine River before the Germans can destroy it. George Segal leads a squad that's not filled with clean-cut heroes, but weary men who've seen too much. On the other side, Robert Vaughn plays a German officer caught between loyalty and conscience. What makes the movie fascinating is that neither side is treated as purely right or wrong. They're both just trying to survive the collapse of everything they know. Filming was anything but easy. The crew shot in Czechoslovakia just before the Soviet invasion in 1968, and production literally had to flee the country mid-shoot. Tanks rolled into Prague while actors and crew scrambled for safety. When they regrouped in Italy, they rebuilt entire sets from memory. That behind-the-scenes chaos bleeds into the film's atmosphere. Everything feels unstable and urgent. It's not a patriotic march, it's a weary sigh. The visuals, all mud and gray skies, mirror a world running on fumes. When you watch it now, The Bridge at Remagen feels raw in a way few war films do. It doesn't glamorize endurance, it questions it. And maybe that's why after all these years it still stands strong, a forgotten gem that captures the last gasp of a world on fire. Kelly's Heroes, 1970. If war is chaos, Kelly's Heroes decided to make it fun, well, almost. Clint Eastwood leads a ragtag bunch of soldiers who discover a stash of Nazi gold behind enemy lines and decide to liberate it for themselves. What could have been a disaster somehow became one of the most entertaining, rewatchable war comedies ever made. Directed by Brian G. Hutton, this film blends grit and absurdity in a way few others dared. You've got Donald Sutherland as the spaced-out tank commander Oddball, delivering lines like he's in another universe, and Telly Savalas chewing scenery as the grumpy sergeant trying to keep the team alive. Together, they form a squad that feels more like a garage band than a military unit. Filmed in Yugoslavia using real Sherman tanks from World War II, the production went all in on authenticity. The massive battle scenes look spectacular even today, but beneath the laughs there's a sly commentary about greed, survival, and the thin line between heroism and hustling. Clint Eastwood wasn't happy with how MGM re-edited the movie, cutting several dramatic scenes he believed gave the story real emotional weight. Still, audiences loved it. It became a cult classic, quoted endlessly for its blend of gallows humor and adventure. Over time, Kelly's Heroes became a time capsule of 70's rebellion, a war film that refused to take orders. It's not about medals or morals, it's about characters who know the system is broken and decide to outsmart it anyway. 50 years later, it still feels fresh, funny, and strangely hopeful. The Last Valley, 1971. Imagine a war movie that looks like a painting and feels like a nightmare. That's The Last Valley, directed by James Clavell, best known for writing Shogun. Set during the 30 Years' War in 17th century Europe, it stars Michael Caine and Omar Sharif as two men from opposite sides who stumble into a hidden valley untouched by conflict. This isn't a film about gunfire, it's about what happens when violence pauses and people are forced to face what they've become. The villagers beg the soldiers to stay and protect them, but the uneasy peace can't last. Suspicion, jealousy, and pride seep in like poison. Shot in the Austrian Alps, the movie's visuals are breathtaking. Vast snow-covered valleys, misty forests, and candlelit interiors turn the film into something almost mythic. Caine delivers one of his most nuanced performances, playing a soldier who's equal parts weary and ruthless, while Sharif adds quiet moral strength as a teacher trying to hold on to decency. Critics were divided. Back then, some said it was too slow, too philosophical, but decades later it feels prophetic. Its message about the futility of endless conflict hits harder now than ever. The haunting score by John Barry, who later composed for James Bond, gives the film a ghostly elegance that lingers long after the credits roll. The Last Valley isn't loud or flashy, it's haunting, poetic, and quietly devastating. A Bridge Too Far, 1977. Talk about ambition. A Bridge Too Far wasn't just a movie, it was an event. Directed by Richard Attenborough and based on Cornelius Ryan's best-selling book, it recreated the failed Operation Market Garden, one of the most daring Allied missions of World War II. The cast list reads like a dream team. Sean Connery, Robert Redford, Michael Caine, Gene Hackman, Anthony Hopkins, and Laurence Olivier all in one film. It was one of the largest productions ever attempted without digital effects. Real planes, real explosions, real paratroopers. That jaw-dropping sequence of thousands of parachutes filling the sky? Every single one was filmed for real. Critics at the time were harsh, calling it too long, too slow, too expensive. But history's been kind. Today, A Bridge Too Far stands as a monument to old-school filmmaking. No CGI, no shortcuts, just pure logistical insanity captured on celluloid. The story itself refuses to glorify war. Instead, it focuses on human error, leaders blinded by ambition, soldiers trapped by decisions made miles away. The result is both grand and heartbreaking. Redford's river crossing under fire remains one of the most intense scenes ever filmed, all done practically with freezing water and real explosives. Over time, audiences began to see the brilliance in its chaos. Attenborough's film wasn't about victory, it was about the price of overconfidence, and that's what makes it endure. It's not a triumphant march, it's a cautionary epic that still feels painfully relevant. Cross of Iron, 1977. When Sam Peckinpah turned his gritty lens toward war, he stripped away every illusion of glory. Cross of Iron isn't just another combat film, it's a study in exhaustion and despair. James Coburn plays Steiner, a German soldier on the Eastern Front, simply trying to keep his men alive while his power-hungry superior chases medals. Filmed in Yugoslavia, the movie feels brutally real. Mud, sweat, and fatigue fill every frame. The camera is restless, the editing rough, the explosions practical, no polish, just chaos. The production itself mirrored that chaos. Peckinpah clashed with producers, the budget collapsed, and scenes were improvised out of desperation. Yet somehow the turmoil shaped a masterpiece. Orson Welles called it the best war film since All Quiet on the Western Front, and it's easy to see why. Coburn delivers one of his greatest performances, tough yet quietly. Broken, a man sickened by authority but loyal to the men beside him. His haunted stare says everything. Honor means nothing when survival is all that remains. Cross of Iron isn't about winning, it's about losing everything. Harsh, unglamorous, and unforgettable, it turned failure into poetry and became a cult classic that still defines 70s war cinema. The Deer Hunter, 1978. Few films hit like The Deer Hunter. Directed by Michael Cimino, it's less a war movie and more a portrait of a community before, during, and after the trauma of Vietnam. Robert De Niro, Christopher Walken, and Meryl Streep headline a story about three friends from a small Pennsylvania steel town whose lives are torn apart by what they experience overseas. The first hour feels deceptively calm: weddings, friendships, small-town banter. Then everything fractures. Cimino used a slow build to make sure the audience felt the weight of what was lost when innocence vanished. The performances are so raw they feel unscripted, especially Walken, whose haunted expression became iconic. The film was famously long, nearly 3 hours, and shot in multiple locations across the U.S., Thailand, and the Philippines. The mountain hunting scenes were filmed under dangerous conditions in real wilderness, capturing both beauty and dread. When it premiered, The Deer Hunter divided critics. Some called it manipulative, others called it a masterpiece. History sided with the latter. It won 5 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, cementing its place as one of the defining films of the 70s. But more than awards, it captured something audiences weren't used to seeing: the psychological aftermath of war. It's not about battles, it's about memory guilt and the silence that follows. Watching it now, you realize it's not just a movie about war, it's about how people try and fail to return to who they once were. Apocalypse Now, 1979. Apocalypse Now isn't just a film, it's a fever dream. Francis Ford Coppola took Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness and dragged it into the jungles of Vietnam, crafting one of cinema's most haunting journeys. Martin Sheen stars as Captain Willard sent upriver to confront Colonel Kurtz, played by Marlon Brando. But the mission isn't the real story, it's the descent into madness. Production was chaos. Typhoons wrecked sets. Sheen suffered a heart attack and Brando arrived unprepared. Yet that turmoil gave the movie its raw power. The visuals are hypnotic, the tone both terrifying and beautiful. From Robert Duvall's wild line about smelling victory to helicopters thundering to Wagner, every frame pulses with controlled insanity. Coppola famously said, "My film is not about Vietnam, it is Vietnam." Watching it, you feel that. The soundscape screams, engines, jungle noise creates an experience that's more hallucination than story. When it premiered, audiences were divided, unsure whether it was madness or genius. Decades later, it's considered both. Apocalypse Now isn't a war movie, it's a mirror reflecting human obsession and darkness. Even today, it feels untamed, like something that shouldn't exist but somehow does. You don't just watch it, you endure it. The Odd Angry Shot, 1979. While Hollywood was busy turning war into spectacle, Australia went the other way. The Odd Angry Shot, directed by Tom Jeffrey, stripped everything down to the bone. Based on a novel by William Nagel, it follows a group of Australian soldiers serving in Vietnam, not heroes, not villains, just ordinary men doing a job they barely understand. Unlike most war films, it skips the grand speeches and moral debates. The soldiers crack jokes, wait for letters, and argue over nothing. And then every so often the quiet shatters. The title itself says it all: long stretches of calm, broken by sudden bursts of chaos. Shot on a shoestring budget with real Australian defense cooperation, the film's power lies in its understatement. The dusty camps, the humid jungles, the dry humor, it all feels completely real. Graham Kennedy, a major TV star at the time, gives a surprisingly grounded performance, reminding viewers that courage often looks like endurance. When it came out, the movie was overshadowed by flashier Hollywood releases. But over the years, it's earned respect for its honesty. There's no propaganda, no melodrama, just life, boredom, and fear all tangled together. Today, The Odd Angry Shot stands as one of the most human depictions of modern warfare ever made. It's not about the noise, it's about the silence in between. That's what makes it unforgettable. The 70s didn't just make war movies, they reinvented them. These 12 films dropped the heroics and showed the truth, courage, confusion, and the cost of it all. Each one still hits harder with time. Which of these classics shook you the most? Share your pick in the comments, hit like and subscribe for more unforgettable stories from cinema's boldest era.